What's up everybody, welcome back. So after the little sidestep with the Mixamo retargeting, we have a new character in game, and I thought it would be a good time to have a look at the project and fix a few bugs that got into it during the course of the time. So there are a few smaller and a few bigger ones, and we're gonna take a look at all kinds of different stuff. We have some widget stuff, we have AI pathing, for example, spectating not being smooth, so there are a lot of different things, and we're gonna try and tackle them all in a video or maybe 2 videos. So for example, if I jump on the roof or even jump off there, the AI will be stuck, they won't be able to find me, and they are not going to look for me either. So that's what we're going to look into first. On a little side note, if you want to get your hands on the project file, you can become a member of the YouTube channel or become a Patreon, and then you will get access to the premium channel in the Discord, and you will find the download for the project in there. So with all of that stuff out of the way, let's dive into today's video. So let's take a look at the AI first. We're going to go to the AI minion base blueprint. And this is actually not the hardest one to fix. So we have the move to player event in here. And in here we have the aborted pin, and that one is not hooked up. So initially I did this on purpose, because if we target a new player with the AI, the abort pin will fire. But I did a small test, and because the old target player is not valid anymore, this shouldn't be an issue. So we can also get rid of the delay in here, by the way. So we can actually get rid of this stuff and simply hook up the on success and the on field directly to the target player getter and get rid of this stuff. So that should fix our pathing issue. And while we're in here, I want to make a small change as well to, let me double check what the name of the event is. So in the attack loop, so that's over here, event attack loop. And over here, we're checking if the current AI is still alive and if he can attack. And I want to add another condition in here. So we're going to add another pin. And then I want to check if our attack trigger is actually still overlapping our target player. So we're simply going to drag in the attack trigger, and then we can call is overlapping actor. So this one, and then we can simply plug in our target player from the variables over here and hook it up to the end node. So this will make sure that the AI won't get stuck in the attacking animation quite as soon as he did. So just another failsafe. So compile and save, and that should be the AI part. So we have that one fixed and out of the way. The next thing I want to take a look at is the lobby characters. So next up we have a bug with the lobby characters. So let me show you. This one isn't actually that old. It appeared after we added the async load. So if the client joins the lobby, for the host everything works, but for the client that has to load 2 meshes, he will load the default mesh for one of the characters. So obviously that's a problem. Let's get rid of this, and let's go to the menu GameMode. So the issue over here is that we're using the async load asset, and that's the latent node. And if we're calling this node again, that call will be ignored. So if we call this again while it's loading an asset, the second call will be ignored. And this function actually fires in for each loop. So this is set lobby character model and skin, and we're calling this from our update selected character over here, and update selected character is called from here, and that's inside the for each loop over here. So this single blueprint has to execute this node a couple of times in a row, and that's not working because if this is called a second time while it's loading, as I mentioned, the second call will be executed, but the asset won't be loaded for the second player. So it will only load the first asset, and it will execute that call twice. So that's an issue, and we can actually fix this sort of for the most part by moving these async load nodes to our lobby character. So that way each lobby character can execute its own latent nodes, and we are actually spreading them out over separate blueprints. So then obviously it won't call them twice, it will call them once on each character. So that way they won't interfere with each other. So that's what we're going to do first. So let's open up our lobby character. And that's in gameplay lobby over here. So we have these multicast nodes over here. And we're going to start with the multicast set character mesh. So let's make a bit of room. And instead of plugging in our normal skeletal mesh, we want to plug in our soft object reference. So let's change that one first. We're going to look for a skeletal mesh. And then we want to select the soft object reference over here. So then we can simply call our async load in the lobby character. Plug this in over here. And we want to cast this to a skeletal mesh. Turn it into a pure cast. And then we can plug this one into the set skinned asset and update and hook it up to the completed pin. So that should fix the multicast character. So we're going to do the same thing for the mesh animation over here. So multicast play mesh animation. Let's disconnect this, and then we also want to turn it into a soft object reference. So this is animation asset. So let's look for that. Animation asset. Okay. So that name doesn't actually ring a bell. Animation asset object reference. Okay, well, we're actually plugging in an animation sequence, I think. So let me look over here. Mesh animation. So that's an animation sequence. So let's just use that one. So we're going to turn this one into an anim sequence. And then also make it a soft object reference. So let's async load the asset over here. And then we want to cast it to the anim sequence. So we can plug it into the node over here. And hook it up to the completed pin. There we go. And then the last thing we need is the skin material. So the multicast set skin material. And over here we do kind of have an issue because we are actually loading two different materials. So the node is going to be called twice. So over here we kind of have to make a small change. So first of all, let's grab the material and turn it into a soft object reference. So that's a material instance. Nope. And then select the soft object reference. And let me see, we have the element index over here, so that's good to go as well. So then we want to add two booleans. So let's create a new variable over here, and I'm going to call this isLoadingMaterial0. So _0, and then create a second one, isLoadingMaterial1. So over here. So we're simply going to grab a boolean over here and check if we are loading material 0. If this is false, then we're going to grab the element index, and we actually need to store this. So we're going to promote this to a variable, and this is our material index _0. So first of all, we want to set our isLoadingMaterial to true. So plug this into the false pin. So if we're not loading it already, we're going to set it to true. And then we're going to save the index in the material index variable. Then we can call our async load asset. So let's make a little bit of room again. Async load asset over here. make sure you actually plug in the material, and we want to cast it to a material instance. So turn it into a purecast and then plug it into the set material node over here. So into the completed pin, plug in the material, and for the element index, we want to grab the actual variable over here. And if this is done, then we can set our isLoading material 0 back to false over here. And now we can do the same thing for the second material. So we can simply copy all of this stuff, and we only need to replace the booleans. So we're going to hook this one up to the true pin. So if this is already loading a material with this node, then we're simply going to go to another branch in here and we're going to execute the node over here. So is loading material 1, and then is loading material 1 over here as well. So we need another one of these material indexes. So we want to duplicate them, _1, and plug it in over here. So this comes from the actual event. Plug in the asset over here as well. So this is hooked up to the completed pin, and then over here we want to plug in material index 1 and make sure we set the correct boolean back to false. So the reason we are also using this variable is if we would plug in the element index over here directly into the set material node, the second time this is called for the second material, this index will change. So then it will load the material in the same slots over here. So we need to store it at the moment we start loading it, so we're sure we have the correct index over here. So with these booleans, we should be able to load two materials at the same time. So we can compile and save this one and go back to the menu GameMode. So we need to clean this up right now because we changed our multicast calls. So let's see, we don't need the async load asset and the cast nodes. So we can simply plug in the row found into the multicast set character mesh. And we're going to grab the soft object reference for the model over here. So again, we can get rid of all of the async loads and all of the cast nodes in here. So all of them in the middle, let's just delete them. And then we can simply grab the multicast mesh animation, hook it up to the character mesh, and then grab the mesh animation. So that's the lobby animation over here. Plug it into the branch over here, and if we are using this material slot, we're going to use our multicast set skin material and make sure we plug in the material from the find node. And then we're going to grab the outer false pin is still hooked up, obviously, so we're going to grab the true pin over here and plug in the material again, and that should be good to go. So compile and save it. And this should fix the lobby characters. So let's have a little quick test over here. So I got the lobby set up. Let's join it. And as you can see right now, for both players, the characters work. So that's kind of fixed, but we still have an issue because right now, if we're going to go to our team deathmatch game mode, things will be screwed up again, as you can see. So right now, it's not loading the correct materials. It's mixing Eli and Quinn together. I think you can see it over here. And the reason for this is because our override lobby character actually calls the function twice. So we kind of fixed it over here by moving them to the lobby character, but we kind of also need to make sure that all of these functions can load two meshes. So that way, if the override lobby character function kicks in and overrides the characters, then everything will still work. So we already did the trick here for two materials. So we're going to do the same thing over here for the mesh and the animation. And after that, we're going to make sure we can load 4 materials, and then we should be good to go. So what we want to do over here is simply create 2 booleans. So is loading mesh underscore 0 and then is loading mesh underscore 1. And then we can grab this stuff. So we simply want to grab the branch with the booleans. Let's make a little bit of room over here. Paste it in and make sure we replace the booleans. So we're not dealing with an index right now. So that makes it a little bit easier. So is loading mesh 0 and then is loading mesh 1 over here. Plug this one into one of the async load nodes. And then after it's done, you can set the boolean back to false. And do the same thing for the other branch. So copy and paste it. And do make sure you plug in the actual asset over here. And change the boolean at the end. So this should be mesh 0 and this should be mesh 1. So that should be good to go. Do the same thing for the mesh animation. So is loading animation 0 and then animation 1. And then we can pretty much copy stuff from up here. So let's grab the branches and the booleans. Hook this one up and replace the bools. So is loading material animation, sorry. And is loading animation over here. Almost. There we go. So grab the async load asset, plug it back into the event and make sure we set the boolean back to false over here. And copy it for the other branch as well. Change the bool and that's good to go. And now over here we can simply duplicate the boolean 2 more times. So material 2 and material 3. And then we have material index and material index 2. So now turn this one into 3. There we go. And we can simply grab all of it and paste it down below here. So we're going to hook this one up to the true pin and then just make sure we replace everything. So we have is loading material 2 over here. And that's material index number 2. So is loading material 3 for the last branch. Close but not quite. And then the material index number 3. And at the end we want to set the correct booleans back to false. So loading material 2 and loading material 3. Make sure we plug in the correct material index over here. And then we also want to hook up the actual asset to the event. And now we should be good to go. We replace these over here. Okay, 2 small things I screwed up. So over here I forgot to plug in the material indexes. So we want to plug those into the event over here. And then in the menu GameMode I actually messed up as well. So if we're loading the first material, we also want to check if we want to load the second material after that. So we need to plug this one into the branch over here as well. So compile and save. And now we should be good to go. So I know I said that before today, but this time we're actually good to go. So let's host the game and let's check it out. Join it. So this one was working, and now if we go to Team Deathmatch, the characters are also working. So that's good to go as well. So if I could resize my window over here, I would. Thank you. And we can select different characters. So stuff like that is working as well. So lobby characters should be good to go, and we can move on to the next thing, and that's the holstered weapons. So there's actually 2 bugs with the holstered weapons. One of them also occurred after adding the async loads, and that's kind of a similar issue as we had with the lobby character. And another bug is with the primaries. If you try to holster two primaries, you will run into issues at some point if you switch weapons, and one slot will become unused and the weapons will start overlapping each other. So we want to go into the hero base character and then go to our select weapon event. So let's have a look over here. Select weapon. So in here we have a for each loop and we're calling the holster weapon function. And over here, let me see, we have the load holstered weapon mesh function that we created, and this one is actually using the async load. So async load asset, and as I mentioned, this is in a for each loop, so this is kind of far away from where we initially started. But this is called in a for each loop, so this node will be executed while it's still loading another mesh, and that's going to cause problems. So what we can do is create a boolean again and simply call that loading asset. Oh, that's a function. That's not what I meant to do. So create a variable and call that loading asset. So that's a boolean. And then we want to go to our load holstered weapon mesh function. And then in here, at the beginning, we're simply going to set it to true. So drag it in here, loading asset set to true. And if it's completed, we're going to set it back to false again. So after we set the skinned asset and update. And then if we go back to our select weapon function, so inside of the loop body, we can simply drop in a branch over here and check for the loading asset boolean. And if this is true, we're going to delay until next tick. So simply wait until the asset is loaded and then we're going to call the next one. So if this is false, plug it back into the holster weapon and then we should be good to go over here. So let's compile this one and let me double check quickly. Yeah, so that should be good to go. And then for the other one with the double primaries, it's actually something else. So let me check. We need to go into the holster weapon function over here. And in here, we're actually checking is valid index, and that's causing problems. So we can simply replace that with a normal is valid, and then we should be good to go. So we want to drag off the holstered weapons over here, get a copy, and make sure we get a copy of index 1. So that's the spot we're checking over here as well. And then drag off here and do an is valid check. So we can plug this one into the branch and get rid of this one. And that should actually fix that issue as well. So that should be good. Yeah, we should be good over here. So compile and save it. And now we should be able to actually have multiple holstered weapons. So we don't really need to test this in multiplayer. So let's have a quick go. Let's do this without enemies. So right now I can pick up multiple weapons over here, and as you can see the shotgun is on the left side, and if I start switching weapons, so now it's actually using both of the primary slots, and that's working, as you can see. So that's fixed, and if we're actually loading into the level with the meshes on our back, so if we selected them in the character menu, they will load properly now as well, because we added the boolean to the async load asset. So next up, I want to take a look at pausing the game. So right now, if we go in game and we pause it, we can't actually unpause it with the same button. So we need to actually use the resume game button over here. We can't close it by pressing escape or whatever key you have assigned to it again. So it's not escape because that closes down the game, but you get my drift. And although we have that set up in our character, so in the event graph over here, that should be over here somewhere. So pause game, and then it doesn't really matter if you hook this up or not. So it's actually hooked up because it's toggling. So if we would press it again, it should unpause the game, but it doesn't. And that's because over here we have our input mode set to UI only. So then it won't register the inputs, and it's actually mentioned over here as well. So only when the action is triggered and the current input mode includes game. So that's not the case. And we can actually fix that. So if we go to our widget blueprint for the pause menu, so let's open that one up and go to the graph. Then for the functions, you can go to override, and we want to override the on key down event. So if we press a key on the keyboard, and then we want to make a bit of room over here. So the first thing we want to do is drag off the key event, and we want to get the key, so the actual key that is pressed. And then we can right click in an empty spot, and we can look for the input subsystem, I think it's called. So this one, the get enhanced input local player subsystem node. So grab this one, and from here you can drag off and you can query keys mapped to action. So query keys, and then mapped to action over here. Now for the action, you can select the input action event that you created. So over here we can simply select input action pause game over here, and this will return an array of all of the inputs that you assign to it in the input mapping. So over here, input pause game. So over here right now I only have the P button, but if you would add multiple buttons over here, it would return an array with all of those buttons. So then we can simply drag off the array over here and find an item, and we want to find the key that is pressed. So if this actually returns greater than or equal to 0, that means we pressed one of the keys mapped to this action. So we're going to grab a branch over here and plug it in. So if this is greater than or equal to 0, that means we want to execute the pause game event. So to do that, we need to get our game instance, and we need to cast it to our shooter game instance. So plug this one into the through pin over here, and on the shooter game instance we want to call our toggle pause game event, and then we should be good to go. So we want to hook up the return node over here, and for the return value you want to enter handled. So that means the event is handled, and this button press won't continue to bubble up. And you can copy and paste it over here, and for example hook it up to the false node, and then put an unhandled over here. So that means the event is not handled yet, and it will continue to bubble up over in other blueprints, for example. So this should make the game unpausable. There's only one thing you need to do if you want to make this work, and it's actually mentioned over here, is pressed when this widget has focus. So we need to make sure this widget is in focus. So we want to go to the actual designer and then select the pause menu over here all the way at the top. And we need to make sure that we enable is focusable. So make sure this is enabled. And then you also want to go to the event that actually creates the widget. So in this case, that's in our game instance. And we have an event in here, or a function UI show pause menu. And in here, let me see, create widget. So over here, set input mode UI only, widget to focus. So in here, you can plug in the actual widget. So if you don't do it, you need to click on the actual widget before you can use the key press, and if you plug it in over here, the widget will be in focus immediately when it's created, so everything should work. So right now, if we go back in game and try to test this. So right now I can just press the P button on my keyboard again, and I can pass and unpass the game. So that's how you can handle button presses in widgets. You can simply query the actual keys mapped to an input action, and then from there you can continue. Just make sure the widget is focusable. That's really important, otherwise it just doesn't work. Okay, so we have that one covered as well. I think for today I'm gonna call it, so then we're gonna split it up into 2 videos, and for the next one we have a few widget fixes. So for the lobby, a button's not working properly, for example, and we're also gonna set up the spectating in a completely different way. So right now we're using the spectator pawn and we're attaching that to other players. And what I want to do to actually make things a lot smoother is just use the set view target option for the player controller. So we can get rid of the spectator pawn entirely and a bunch of other stuff, and we can simply use set view target on the player controller to spectate other players. So that's what we're gonna do in the next video. Hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please consider leaving a like, and I'll be back soon for more. Talk to you later, guys. Bye bye.